The Jura Distillery is not on many Scotch whiskey enthusiasts' favorite distillery lists. In fact, it's basically achieved a bit of a meme status. Quite literally, you can go online, search for whiskey memes, and you're going to find quite a few of them if you're looking at Scotch related memes. Aimed directly at Jura Distillery and its perceived poor quality. It has essentially become a bottom shelf, bargain basement supermarket dram in the UK. However, that has allowed it to become one of the better selling brands, period, there in terms of single malts. However, Whyte and Mackay, the owners of Jura, amongst a few other distilleries we'll talk about later, has been known to dabble with slightly more enthusiast-focused or naturally presented whiskeys. And they have done so with the most recent edition of the Jura 16-year-old Perspective Number 1, which is bottled at 46%, 46.5% ABV. It says right on the label, non-chill filtered and natural color, and comes in at a pretty reasonable 70 pounds or approximately $90. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Whisky Uncorked. My name is Brian. We are back with a whiskey review that I've been actually looking forward to doing now for quite some time, really, since before Christmas when this bottle first showed up at my doorstep. This is another one of those that is not available in the US, and I don't expect it to become available here. Unfortunately, like we didn't get any of the Fettercairn bottles when those moved to like 46% or when they revamped that line. I've never seen those for sale here. And I don't really expect anything to be different with this one, being that Jura isn't a very common or popular Scotch whiskey here. Kind of bows out to the Glenlivet and Glenfiddich. I've had a few bottles of Jura independent bottlings, and they have ranged from pretty good to actually pretty damn good, to be honest with you, particularly ones that have some significant age to them, bottled by the Thompson brothers. But I digress. I had essentially completely skipped any official bottlings of Jura for pretty obvious reasons. It just was not something that I was really interested in buying, based on the feedback that is pretty readily available from online reviewers and pretty much any channel dedicated to drinking quality single malts. Jura is known for not making those, frankly, or at least not selling them, as I normally say. What a distillery produces isn't necessarily what they sell. And I was perfectly happy picking up the occasional independent bottling and, enjoying that for whatever it may be. However, the one thing that I always heard is that it was quite a shame that Jura decided to go this route in terms of their the type of whiskey they were going to make and sell, as it has been known, at least in the past, of making some pretty high character, high quality whiskey. And the people who got to enjoy that maybe in the past, or do continue to enjoy it through independent bottlings, do lament the loss of what they've perceived as a pretty solid whiskey. So when this one was announced, the Perspective Number 1, this was kind of a continued trend from the owners, Whyte and Mackay, who were bought out by Imperador, who was like a brandy company. They bought Whyte and Mackay a decade or so ago, I think it was. And under Whyte and Mackay, you have Dalmore, Fettercairn, Tamnavulin, and of course Jura in terms of malt whiskeys. And the Fettercairn went through a bit of a rebranding, and they released, I think, everything in their core range other than their 12-year-old introductory is above 46%. It's non-chill filtered. I believe they are all colored there. And even the Dalmore has at least acknowledged that people want a non-chill filtered natural color whiskey, because they have released both their Luminary line and their Select series in at least the last several years now, which are 46% or above natural color and non-chill filtered. Tamnavulin has gone more in the direction of cask exploration and a lot of different cask finishing and things like that. As far as I know, their whiskeys still tend to be at that kind of 40 or maybe 43%. But what we're seeing is Whyte and Mackay at least acknowledging that people like us exist. Prices be damned, right? Because even Fettercairn, those Fettercairn bottlings have crept up in price. I think the 16-year-old, which I did have a bottle of a few years back, That looked like that was about 85 pounds now, which isn't crazy, at least in terms of like US pricing. That would put it, it would cross that $100 point. It would be on the expensive side of the 15, 16-year-old line. But obviously the Dalmore 15-year-old that came out last year, I think it was last year, one that my brother Kevin, who's on the podcast with me, I think he was going to name that as Whiskey of the Year. We never got to record that podcast due to illness and that sort of thing. But that was $180, which is really expensive for a 15-year-old whiskey. Although you can make an argument that maybe coming from Dalmore, it wasn't nearly as a surprise, but he absolutely loved it. He bought it because he was trying to, get quality whiskey from basically every distillery in Scotland. That was kind of his, and probably continues to be his mission. And he really enjoyed that whiskey. And he talked about that on the podcast. And he sent it to me in a blind. And yeah, it was pretty good. I think it came in second behind like a 14-year-old Altmore. I think it was Altmore from the Thompson Brothers. So no slouch. It was good. But anyways, the point being that Whyte and Mackay, who was once this big, bad boogeyman in terms of Scotch whiskey enthusiasts, releasing some of the most bland, cynical, overpriced, over-diluted whiskey in all of Scotland, and a perpetual abuser of E150A caramel coloring, they have at least acknowledged that people like us exist. This is, of course, culminated in 2024 with a release of a 46% plus. This is 46.5% ABV. It says right here at the bottom, a natural color, non-chill filtered. It's 16 years old. This is aged in American white oak bourbon barrels, finished in Oloroso sherry casks. And this is, at least on paper, everything that an enthusiast Scotch whiskey drinker is, at least in the modern day, at least in the circles that I tend to hang out with or watch on the internet, tend to look for as being hallmarks of a quality whiskey. Now, the big question is, does it taste good? And we'll, of course, get into that. But I can tell you that, yeah, it's pretty good. How good it is, we'll talk about. But this is a bone that they've thrown us, and maybe a cynical one at that, but this has been a progression, like I said, from Whyte and Mackay. They've done this in the past. Yes, Fettercairn still uses coloring. Yes, Dalmore is still very overpriced for what it is, but they have kind of gone all out here because this hits everything. This is a fairly affordable whiskey. I said it's not available in the US, but this appears to be about 70 pounds in the UK, which comes out to just under $90. That would include tax, and that's a pretty affordable 16-year-old whiskey. As I mentioned, even the Fettercairn 16 is like 15 pounds more than this, which is going to come out to like $20, right? So that's a big difference for the same age of whiskey. And this one does not have coloring in it. It's not filtered, or it's not chill filtered, and it's even given us a little bump over that 46% ABV, which is pretty common because I think all the Fettercairn options are a little bit over 46% as well, and as are the Dalmore ones that I was talking about earlier. So I'll get a little bit more in depth probably after the tasting notes. We'll kind of see what comes out while I'm doing them, but just wanted to say like one thing about this whiskey. I understand that Whyte Mackay has not been viewed as a friend of Scotch whiskey or Scotch whiskey enthusiasts, cynical and at times absurd, even offensive business decisions over the years. And I get it. But as I mentioned, they have acknowledged us, which is a lot more than what we can say about some of the other companies who don't seem to care that we exist. And all that's done under the different brands that they have. And yes, the Dalmores are overpriced, but they can't sell them for cheap because they've positioned Dalmore to be a luxury whiskey. They can't undercut their own products. It's unfortunate, but it's kind of just the way it is, right? Jura is maybe their opportunity to truly reach out. And if we are going to be the ones, either literally or figuratively, pounding our fists on the table and demanding that whiskey stop being abused, whiskey be given to us at reasonable prices, at a relatively natural presentation, then when a company does that, we do have to accept to support that as much as we possibly can. Now, if this doesn't seem like a whiskey that is within your preference profile and that sort of thing, totally get that. If you are just completely anti Whyte and Mackay and everything that they stand for, and you don't care what they do, fair enough. But yeah, if you have the ability to do this, to buy a bottle of this, provided maybe this review sounds like this is something even remotely that you would enjoy. As I mentioned, I think it is a good whiskey. We need to support it when companies make these choices and let them know that we are at least mildly appreciative of their attempts at giving us solid examples from distilleries in their stable. I'll save any other pontificating until after we do a review and give things a score. We'll see what kind of mood I'm in at that point. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's see how it's nosing and tasting today. And here we go. So this is one that can present itself kind of in one and two ways. Most of the time it's a very fruity, juicy, tropical, coastal, stone fruit, that sort of thing. Maybe more stone fruit, like peaches and apricots on the nose at least. There is a bit of a dryness that comes out. Sometimes it's more of like a dry hay, your stereotypical kind of dry hay from Scotch. Other times it's a little bit more of a dry mineralic quality, akin to, say, the Ardnamurchan Marken that we reviewed last week. But this is West Coast Island whiskey from Scotland, is obviously a little further south there, down by Islay and Campbelltown. But yeah, it kind of, the levels of these things have kind of been changing for me. This has been open since before Christmas. See, I have been, at least relatively speaking, sipped on this a little bit more than maybe some of my more recent reviews, but it's usually better that way. Yeah, so apricots, peaches, there's a bit of a drying quality. There's some, it's malty, there's some vanilla, there's all that stuff. It's a little bit coastal, right? It's got a little bit of that maritime air. It's slightly salty on the palate, but it's slightly mineralic. It's good. It's not something that I think has completely disentranced me. It's solid. It fits right in with a number of other whiskeys that I've been enjoying over the last few years. If I was drinking this a year or two ago, or even nosing it and tasting it, I probably would have been like over the moon, because I was like completely in the bourbon cask, the tropical fruit refill cask. I was obsessed. That has lessened. I still really enjoy that. But I've been drinking a lot of different stuff over the last year for obvious reasons. And so this has settled down a little bit. I'm not completely, just ecstatic about this. This fits in with a bunch of other things I've been drinking. Even stuff that at times when I've done reviews, I think like the Glenmurray 18, there's been a few different ones that at least one or two people have commented that they think that whiskey is kind of straightforward and maybe even a little bland. And I think maybe in retrospect, it's like, yeah, I can maybe agree with that, but I really love the thing that it does do. And this kind of fits in with those. It's not hyper complex, but yeah, no complaints. It smells really nice. Yeah, it was a little bit fruity, maybe even slightly floral. It's Valentine's Day when I'm shooting this, and there's flowers in the house. Just got a whiff of those earlier. So maybe that's just on my mind. But why don't we try it on the palate and see how it's tasting today? Cheers. The front of the palate is, it's similar to the nose. It's fine. It's creamy. You can tell this is probably non-chill filtered. They're not lying. It's got some viscosity. Definitely feel it on the back of my lips. Like, it's kind of like you put a little bit of chapstick just on the back or something like that. And, but once you swallow it, so the front's a little simple. It's a little vanilla, a little honey. Maybe it's a little fruity. Doesn't immediately grab your attention. Solid mouthfeel. Once you swallow it, there's a really nice kind of coastal salty bite. It's been a little bit of a theme over the last few reviews with the Ardnamurchan, the Ardnaho and the Ardnamurchan. So we've been hanging out on the west coast of Scotland the last few reviews, so that kind of salty bite is something that's pretty familiar. This one The Art and Mackay now, if I'm going to compare the two, that's a little bit of a quicker, more intense bite, not as quite as drawn out and long as the Ardent. This kind of is in the middle of those two. It's much more drawn out. It stays salty. It doesn't completely change for immediately on the finish. But once you have that salty bite, that hangs around, and then you get the fruits, and then that's when it's much more tropical, much more mango. One thing I didn't mention, I think at other times, I was picking up a little bit of baking spice, something that's a little bit more kind of ginger, maybe a touch of cloves, that sort of thing. Still pick that up on the palate a little bit, maybe a little bit more cinnamon, probably definitely a little bit of ginger. Ginger's probably a little bit more accurate, I suppose. Let's go in for a second sip real quick. Here we go. There's a chewiness to this, a maltiness, similar to like a nougat in a candy bar. Yeah, there's a chewiness, there's a caramel, with that saltiness, salted caramel. One thing that I think with the fruit that kind of called out to me was saltwater taffy. If you're familiar with that, this is a tasty whiskey. I'm not gonna lie. Jura be damned, official bottling. Again, this is a meme. Like sometimes it almost feels. There's been moments where I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna go say this Jura is a fantastic whiskey, and people are gonna be in the comments just like, this guy's crazy, I'm unsubbing. But if that's the case, have a nice day, I suppose, because this is good. It's not phenomenal. It's not. This isn't changing my world. It's not revolutionizing my whiskey experience or my view of Scotch. But this is good. If you're gonna buy it because of the Oloroso finish and that was what you're looking for, this is much more, in my opinion, in line with a bourbon experience. Again, with that Oloroso maybe helping out with some of those like baking spices that pop out every once in a while, maybe kind of helping add a little bit of juiciness. I do occasionally, I wasn't picking it up there, that was one thing I was looking for. I do occasionally get just a hint of like a milk chocolate, which I usually, again, associate with some Oloroso casks. Talk about casking on this. This one is a little bit of a strange color, I'm not gonna lie. There was something about it, I can't really describe it to you, but just looking at it, it looked like a strange color, and I was like, well, it's not colored, right? There's no artificial coloring. And I do have an older bottle. As I mentioned, I have a 34-year-old Thompson Brothers bottling. I think they released last year, 2023 or something like that. That one kind of has a weird color too. It's kind of like an olive color. It's got like a tint of green to it. And I guess you can kind of say the same thing about this. Was wondering, Jura is known for their whiskeys not being super great, at least their official bottlings. And a lot of this is going to have to do with their casks. It's one major way, from my understanding, that distilleries can cut costs so that they can keep their whiskey low price, which doesn't get talked about a lot, right? But some of these distilleries that we criticize for making poor whiskey, or Diageo and Johnny Walker and all that stuff, they're not making whiskey to taste good. They're making whiskey to fill a price point, to hit a certain demographic, and this is their own fault, and it may be still how they make the most money. If they could make more money doing something else, they would probably do it. So Jura's making whiskey to a price point, which, if they're gonna sell cheap whiskey, even though the 12-year-old is $48 plus tax here in the States, it's not super cheap in terms of single malts. It's pretty cheap, but you kind of have to know, like, most people are just going to drink the blends at that point. They're going to pay the 30 or 35 instead of 50. So it's probably why maybe Jura is a little bit kind of in no man's land here. However, or the point being that I wondered, like, do they have like good casks of Jura around at this point, right? They've been doing this for quite a while now. Are they filling good casks with Jura whiskey? I think I read somewhere that the finish on this was like 4 years long, which is like, that cask had to have been dead too. There's no way that's like first fill Oloroso, right? That's 4 years in a first fill. There's no way. And 16 years old, like, that looks like a refill bourbon cask to me. And if it spent multiple years in Oloroso, these got to be pretty quiet casks. Let's just be real. Well, let's talk about score before we go any further. This is a really good whiskey. I really enjoy drinking this. This could definitely be a go-to for me. And just if I'm ranking this against a lot of other stuff that I've been drinking lately, this is in that 6 or 7 territory for sure. And yeah, gone back and forth a little bit. So I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10, although which is still above average, only because I think that I have to put my brain in, you know, in its current state. A year ago, probably is going to get a 7 unequivocally. This isn't so far out of the range of, or this isn't novel, this isn't exciting necessarily, but it is quality. So it's not going to get the 7, where at least the 7's going to have something a little bit more that kind of defines, that clearly defines a distillery. And as I'm getting to know Jura, maybe that comes out of this bottle, as well as the independence I have. So 6 out of 10, which is above average. That's a good score. This is something I've thoroughly enjoyed sipping on. In terms of value, I wonder if this needed to be 16 years old. Trying to find a reason why it would have to be 16. I guess maybe like I said, if these are really dead casks and you're stretching it, I would almost want, I would wonder if what this was like at 12 or 14 years old, if you could even drop that price even more. Because yeah, the 16-year-old age statement, I wouldn't get super excited about that per se. It drinks nicely. It's got a nice bite to it from that salty quality, as I mentioned. But I think generally speaking, you can't really complain about it. I'll say this is a solid value. With maybe some slightly better casks, you could get a pretty similar quality out of a 12-year-old and probably be able to drop another, 10 pounds off the price at least. Or, $15 or so, $12, $15, somewhere in there. So, yeah, solid value. It is what it is. It's 16-year-old age statement. They're not going to sell it for less than 70 pounds, I don't think. Especially since they're marketing it towards people like us who tend to spend a little extra on their bottles. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you made it this far, I hope you can hit the like button. If you're new and you want some more content like this, please hit the subscribe button and let me know. Have you been able to try this? Are you willing to forgive Whyte and Mackay for their sins and let them acknowledge us, let them throw us a bone and at least pick up a bottle and say, yeah, this is what we want. Thanks. Thanks for making something at least drinkable. But until next week, hopefully we have another interesting review for you. We'll see you then. Thank you. Cheers.